Ellevate Louisiana's January Environment and Infrastructure Policy Committee meeting. I'm Julie Stokes, founder and CEO of Ellevate. Today, we're joined by Dr. Margaret Reams to discuss how Louisiana can navigate energy transitions by balancing new technologies, community engagement, and responsive public policy. Dr. Reams is the Joseph D. Martinez Professor of Environmental Sciences at Louisiana State University and a nationally recognized expert in environmental policy, community resilience, and environmental justice. She recently led community efforts for LSU's National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences Superfund research program, working at the intersection of science, policy, and public trust. Dr. Reams, thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and I know you have plenty of good information. So if you want, I'll just let you get started.
Well, thank you, Julie, and everybody so much for setting this up. And again, Happy New Year. Ready or not, here we are. And it's going to be a jam-packed series of changes. We have a feeling coming at us. So anyway, with no further ado, and again, this talk that we're going to be thinking about here, what I'm going to be saying and some of the key concepts really have to do with this intersection of unfamiliar technology that is being applied in the service of what we think of as the energy transition. And as we know, Louisiana seems to be ground zero for many new projects that are designed for a future that is going to be less dependent on carbon sources of energy. And we can only imagine the controversy, the ripple effects in one of the major oil and gas dominant state economies, in the whole country. So this is, we've got a front row seat to some very interesting politics and the emerging field that is being called socio-technology, the extent to which people are interacting and embracing and, feeling freaked out or comfortable about unfamiliar technology being rolled out in local communities. So what we're doing today is to think about finding a rational middle ground. And again, I know that's what all of you have formed this organization to try to further. So this is very much needed now. And again, we're going to be just thinking first of all about what are some of the key challenges associated with planning for a lower carbon future, the role of trust in who gets to provide technical information that lands with some sense of authority and believability in a very polarized political environment these days. And again, some of the research about technology, especially for carbon capture, we'll take a few minutes and look at. And we'll be ending with an idea of really setting the table for healthy, much needed collaborative planning among key leaders and stakeholders of host communities and these energy companies as they're coming in. And LSU is working on something that we're calling the LEAP model, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but to help set the table and really facilitate productive discussions and to get beyond this adversarial climate that we're living in. So if we think about what is involved with a lower carbon future, it's inescapable that we're going to be implementing new or unfamiliar technologies, or at a minimum scaling up technologies maybe that have been around for a while. And so the energy transition really means moving toward, again, this lower carbon type of an economy. And energy transition refers to, again, it can include carbon management technologies, such as the carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects, the direct air capture projects also that have been in the news so much recently in Louisiana. And also, though, we're thinking in terms of renewable energy sources, right? Wind, solar, geothermal, and others. And again, nuclear power is back. in the discussions about the data centers and how on earth we're going to provide that amount of new electricity, the idea of small modular reactors that use less water, that are supposed to be safer than the grandfather nuclear power back in the day of 3 Mile Island and some of the big controversies. So, but again, the connecting through line through these discussions are that we're talking about utilization of technology at a scale that is coming to a community near you. And again, it is going to be very confusing to non-experts and people that are not working in these industries. And how do we, again, make a path forward? What is that rational path forward whereby communities can also benefit from this energy transition period? And especially important in our context of especially the industrial corridor in Louisiana, where we make national and international news with environmental justice issues. So, and again, given the change in federal policies just over the last few months, away from a requirement for community benefit planning, for the host community and the new energy investment projects, given that that is now off the table, what is going to be that rational path forward? Because again, this is almost a perfect storm. And I think we'll explore some of the elements as to why this is such a complicated public policy and future planning kinds of issue. So the big question, especially about carbon capture and utilization, is how will the host communities react? What is really, at stake here? What is understood? What is not understood? Why are we doing any of this? And again, a lot of research has been conducted in the European Union, in Australia, in the East as well, about public attitudes about carbon capture and sequestration, and the hope of possibly utilizing captured carbon to make, cleaner hydrogen, for example. What do the host communities and the general public feel about this and know and understand? And unfortunately, there's not been a ton of academic research that focuses on the imminent possibility or proposal of carbon capture projects in local communities. These surveys and studies have been conducted for several years at a more hypothetical level and at a more national or a bigger spatial scale. So first of all, I think we need to realize that we're sitting in an important position in terms of scholarship. Louisiana communities are going to be an important focus of books to be written, of dissertations and master's theses to be written, news stories certainly, but this is an important topic area, and we and our people in Louisiana will play an important role in furthering understanding, again, that people 100 years from now, we believe, are going to be looking back at us wondering, what did they do? What did they know? How did they know it? And again, there are going to be important lessons learned in Louisiana that can be applied to communities worldwide. But certainly we're seeing immediately that issues coming, in the news every day, questions of safety. Are these pipelines really safe? If we are scaling this technology up to this extent, what on earth are the hazards? The permitting. What do we know about the adequacy of the permit, the stringency of the permits, the monitoring and enforcement protocols, the whole idea of the economic benefits, who will win, who is going to be asked to incur some risks and not be compensated perhaps. So this whole question of distribution of the risks and the benefits is central to this question. And ultimately the fair compensation for additional industrial activity in a host community. And again, that can be the intake site, for carbon capture, or the sequestration site, or any of the communities in the line of pipelines between those two sites. And again, these are thorny, important questions, for not just us in Louisiana. So again, layer, if you will, on top of those kinds of challenges, as if that was not enough, and heaven knows it ought to be, but as if that was not enough, we're also dealing with intense political polarization that you all know better than I do even. And, again, we see this everywhere, this lack of trust in the information that we're getting from a variety of institutions that used to be considered, more trustworthy by some, elements in our communities. We are in a real problem here. This undermines community resilience. It undermines trust in each other and trust in our institutions that are set up to safeguard public health, public safety, even economic development. There's also a general body of research about that central pillar there, the lack of trust in institutions. After COVID, obviously there was a real concern, coming from the public health communities. I've worked with the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences on these Superfund issues and communicating, public health concerns with companies, that have been tasked with cleaning up Superfund sites, for example. But we're at a point where there is a real crisis of, understanding of the risk communication. Do we trust the organization that is providing that data? And again, the research is saying that think of the Centers for Disease Control running into trust problems about vaccinations. Heaven knows that's still alive and well right today. But again, the research is saying that members of the public can arrive at a position where they say, I'm not going to believe anything coming out of that organization. And it can be either because of that they are incompetent, they're in over their heads, they really don't know what they're doing, or even scarier, they have bad motives, they have bad intentions. They're trying to take away our freedom or destroy our way of life or control us somehow. That is a tough hill to start getting over. If you're trying to communicate important technical information about emerging energy technology, this is like the worst time imaginable for us to be running into, this kind of widespread polarization around sources of technical information. And then finally, we layer on a level of environmental justice concerns in Louisiana. And again, this is a wicked set of complex problems where there is, multiple sources of potential environmental exposure risk, cumulative environmental exposure risks going on for about 100 years now in some of these communities. And again, the people, the building block of any strong and resilient local community are going to be the stakeholders, the people that live there. And again, we have seen polarization to the point where there are residents in environmental justice communities that don't realize that regulators are obliged to hear from them. So again, they may also think of regulatory agencies, the state agencies that give the permits for new industrial expansion. They may think, well, they don't care. I don't even know when and how to give a public comment. So this is something that we have working against us, frankly, in Louisiana. Okay. And so again, the research is fascinating, especially around carbon capture. And this was just a slide I put together to sort of show this flow chart, that the right-hand box, that purple box that says greater perceived net benefits are associated with greater local acceptance of a new carbon capture project or energy transition project. But we have to go back, to the left-hand side of that diagram. Where do we see the technical information coming from? And the idea that the public is going to be looking at the perceived, they're going to have preconceived, perhaps, notions about the competency and the motivations of that source of the data and of the information. Not surprisingly, more trust in where they're getting the technical information is associated with weighting the possible benefits a little more, a little heavier, a little more generously. We want to believe that those benefits are indeed going to happen. Less trust, obviously, is going to be associated with weighting the perceived or the possible risks greater, the likelihood of something happening to one of those pipelines greater. And, again, this is kind of true regardless of what, the big topic is. But this is just the way human beings tend to process technical information that they're hearing. It's hard to separate it from the messenger. Okay. And again, we have, I probably should have added another layering complication, and that is, if there's a chance of displacing oil and gas workers in the industry in Louisiana, and again, those jobs have been declining, in numbers over the last few years anyway. But again, this one could think in terms of risks to the existing economic base, and that could also color some of the information that is being conveyed. But generally, research has shown that politically conservative people tend to not trust the government data coming out of agencies. Politically liberal folks tend to be more likely to believe data coming out of government agencies. Likewise, more conservative people tend to be a little more pro-business and believe that the companies have the accurate data, and liberal voters tend to have a slightly different view on that. So again, given our extreme political polarization, this is tricky. Whom do we trust, to give us good numbers and good risk studies about some of these new technologies? And again, research in general about public attitudes and acceptance of unfamiliar or new technologies. We have to have first a basic science literacy, kind of a foundation of technical knowledge, and we're kind of lacking that, in most communities in the U.S. right about now. This idea of, again, what about climate change? We've been encouraged, by some political leaders to say it's a hoax, that it's not anything that we need to worry about, or that it's not anything that human beings are controlling. Well, that would be nice. But if in that kind of situation, a community is being asked to make an informed decision about, okay, are we going to go ahead and get on board with more pipelines for carbon capture? Because we've got to do something. Are we starting at that sense of less carbon is good? Can we agree on that? Not really. So this idea of, well, if not carbon capture, then what? Are we going to do energy efficiency? Are we going to do nuclear? Are we going to do this direct air capture? Are we going to put tax on carbon use? What if is this part of that all of the above kind of set of actions that will help reduce global climate change? Well, we need some sort of shared framework of why are we doing any of this? Why are we doing any of this? And then again, we tend to look at the perceived risks and benefits, think of pipelines, being added to an already heavily industrialized community, let's say the industrial corridor. We think about personal risks and benefits. Is this going to gum up the traffic? Is it going to smell weird? am I incurring some household risk because I live close to one of these new pipelines? Also societal, is this a waste of our resources? Are we going to have anything good, when I'm dead and gone for my grandchildren to benefit from? And again, is the risk of any implementation of new technology, and of course there's going to be some increased hazards of something, and is that going to be worth it? And again, also the researchers point to this affective image piece of the puzzle. This has to do with the stigma of the technology. Think of nuclear power. After the Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and the Japanese tsunami experience just a few years ago, that can be hard to overcome, obviously. And then a tradition, we are human animals. I mean, we are cave people in so many ways. We're almost trapped in our own subjectivity. We believe what we have experienced firsthand, or people close to us have reported. We have a horrible time imagining the unimaginable or something that we've not lived yet. And my colleagues and I often will try to give each other pep talks and say, look, this is what education is all about. This is what the scientific method is all about. It's what good music and good literature is even all about. It is about getting us out of this trap of our own little, subjective view of the world and broadening us. Because sometimes the stuff we have observed, and we try to make sense of it, but that obviously is not going to be, the final answer. And we have to push beyond. And again, NIMBYism, in Louisiana, this is really, really ever present. There's always a sense of some other community is benefiting and I'm losing. We're taking and look at the talking points, coming from both sides around carbon capture projects. There's a fear that captured carbon is a pollutant, is the waste material coming from some other place. And, for heaven's sakes, I don't want it in my backyard. Let it stay where it came from. But again, a real sense that we just are self-interested and we fear deeply that we're getting ripped off and that somebody is taking advantage of us. In international relations, there's a theory about this, that countries will behave in terms of treaty, entering into new treaties against their self-interest. They will say no to an agreement, even just because another country is standing to benefit more. And we've seen this even in our alliances. The U.S. will kind of hang back, even if the UK looks like they're in a position to benefit more than we are. Somehow we're wired that way. We want the best deal. We kind of want to make sure that we're on top always. And so this is a shame. This is not helping us at this point. So anyway, and as we're working with communities in the industrial corridor, where there is a high concentration of environmental exposure from multiple sources and a lot of poverty, we see these complicating factors. Sometimes, lack of home internet or a good computer at home. Technical information may be limited. The work we did with the LSU Superfund Center up in Colfax, Louisiana, it's more of a rural environmental justice setting. There's crummy Wi-Fi in that part of the state. And so again, in Grant Parish up there. So again, also limited time and resources to attend community meetings and to be as available to learn about the technology and the project being proposed. And then again, less experience interacting with industry leaders and also the representatives from the state regulatory agencies. And again, we're optimistic, the university colleagues at Southern, LSU, and UNO, also Tulane, we've got a fair amount of experience in working with environmental justice communities and research translation, trying to kind of share technical information with a variety of different kinds of community groups. And again, just quickly, what is environmental justice? I was looking over, a textbook a couple of minutes ago before we got on, and I was thinking, we think environmental justice is DEI and that it's gone now. Well, it isn't. It isn't. There is a foundation in the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution of our property and not seizing our personal property, private property. We don't have sacrifice zones in this country let's say the state of Wyoming is now going to be a landfill because that would be good for everybody else. And those people could be compensated and forced to move. We don't do that, so there's a Fifth Amendment. There's what else? The 10th Amendment, the police powers, that give the states responsibility for health and safety. We have to have standards of and again, we don't have sacrifice zones. And then the 14th Amendment means that, that we have to have these equal protections, for people, right? Again, it comes down to, we don't have sacrifice zones around, we just don't do it. People can choose to move. There's just compensation. There's negotiation. But again, environmental justice is deep in the U.S. Constitution, and this gives the power. You think about it for local planning decisions, for zoning, this type of thing. It's designed again to protect health and safety and property value of people. But again, it just has meant EPA settled on this definition, and it is still up on some of their websites, that it's the just treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, right? Regardless of demographics, race, income, in agency decision making. So that just means that lever of democracy is all the people are invited to give public comments and for these collective policy decisions. And again, that we are fully protected from everybody, disproportionate and adverse human health and environmental effects and hazards. Again, and that environmental justice comes down to the question of the distribution of the risk, exposure risks, and the benefits. Is all the money going to an overseas company, and all of the bad air, the hazard, the risk is being borne by the host community in Louisiana? That would be environmental injustice. And so again, this is just kind of mom and apple pie, in our country. So this I just dropped in. This is the EPA Environmental Justice Screening Tool, a GIS tool that you can play around with. Frankly, I don't know whether it's still there completely intact today on this website or not, but it will be. Sadly, environment, that's right. There are sacrifice zones. Anybody that's paying attention in Louisiana has seen it. And so again, this is just an overlaying of pollution sources, right? 95th to 100th percentile of toxic release to air. And that we are in a heavily, obviously, industrialized area. People living in this industrial corridor are burdened, by multiple permitted facilities, and this creates a high likelihood of health disparities, of economic suppression of property values, other kinds of challenges. We get the food deserts in these areas and so on. Now, a lot of the current discussion of carbon capture, is going on in the industrial corridor for a good reason. It's because the petrochemical company itself can invest in technology, and part of that infrastructure money back in the last administration was for demonstration projects and tax breaks, right, to encourage capturing of carbon to keep it from going into the air. And so it stands to reason, of course, that these existing firms and petrochemical industries in this area will be trying to capture some of their own carbon and store it, right? Or do some, utilize it and make something else with it. And this is not DEI. This is a fact. You know, we are living in a highly industrialized part of the country. We see also around Beaumont, Houston, you know, and there are other industrial corridors in the U.S. You know, around Bayonne, New Jersey, up around the Great Lakes. There are some examples. But I just wanted to remind us of that. This is not. We didn't dream this. You know, this is not. You know, something that is a political fad. And again, I just wanted to share this too. This was a public opinion national survey back, what was it, 22, 20, no, 24. Yeah, a good survey in April of 24. And again, just shows widespread general public support among all kinds of people. You know, that environmental justice, that you would support the fair treatment and meaningful involvement. And that meaningful involvement piece is important. We've got to get those levers of democracy working well in Louisiana communities. And again, this is encouraging, you know, liberals and conservatives that answered this question. It was just something from the business school I wanted to share. There's a guy, Alan Murray, that has written an interesting book called Tomorrow's Capitalist. And he is saying definitively that there is something called stakeholder, instead of, they're like shareholders. In other words, that the community has been seen as kind of the poor stepchild or an afterthought. Even the idea of the host community, it's like somehow it's different, you know, from the company that is going to be investing there. And that even can be a little bit misleading. And he says that this new stake, I mean, you think about it, any company is going to, you know, that is thinking clearly, you know, will want good air, good water, a good quality of life in that community where they are located, and also workers will be coming from the community. But Murray talks about the fact that there are hidden sort of taxes if you're not a good citizen in the community where the operation is located. You know, there's going to be hell to pay. There are going to be lawsuits. There are going to be moratorium. There are going to be zoning restrictions. And that ultimately it's going to cost you more to borrow money, you know, to grow the company, and that nobody in their right mind wants to be holding the kind of liability that BP Oil, you know, did. But that also just the word of mouth, you know, you don't want your company to carry this extra burden of not being, you know, careful or concerned about issues, justice issues and fairness issues in the community. So again, anyway, he's just saying ultimately this will not end well, you know, if we take this adversarial shorter term approach. And again, what happened to Justice 40? You know, we had, and I didn't make a slide on this, but we had in place, you know, there were suggested topics of investment that the companies and the stakeholder representatives would come together, think about job training, about addressing, you know, maybe some natural infrastructure for flood control, better Wi-Fi, any number of investments that could be made into the community. This all fits, whether Justice 40 is still with us or not. The benefits of this kind of collaborative environmental planning are real, and we've known about this forever. But you know, research has shown that if the community, if there is a planning group, representative group, and it needs to be representative and not just, you know, a couple of folks here and there, But if we get input from the community, there are more sustainable plans. It builds the social capital through which the stakeholders are interacting with each other. They kind of get a little, we're elevating that context of understanding, the basic world, right? Or whether it's climate change and how carbon capture might be part of a solution or not, it would have to be done right. And again, but it enhances trust among the participants, whether it's a dialogue committee or a series of planning charrettes or meetings, with the company and the representatives. That this is a longer term kind of conflict management approach, and it elevates the technical and scientific literacy of everybody that participates and creates this idea of a shared understanding of the facts. And heaven knows, I guess this is going to have to start locally, because we're in a real pickle at the moment. And so again, this is just a quick thing I dropped in. We had done back a few years ago a good literature review in the scholarly research about what are the building blocks of a more resilient human community. And there's this idea of self-organizing, that you don't want these silos of groups within the local community. These people, the groups, the residents have to be talking to other kinds of residents. We need to do everything we can to support these stable information networks. And through that, it develops communication and trust among people, among the actual stakeholders. And again, this mirrors what ecosystem scientists have known for years about a more resilient natural ecosystem. A big storm can come through and blast out all of the fish, in a particular area. Well, what happens to that food web? When those little fish swim away, and maybe maybe things change physically for a little while in terms of that water body and shoreline. If the basic function of the community can carry on, like nutrient cycling or something like that, if there can be a reorganization of the little critters that live there in that ecosystem so that they're carrying out, then it just doesn't collapse. And that we see this in a human community, and it's the various kinds of residents and people and organizations. They have to be in the habit, right, of interacting with each other. Then, again, the scientific treatment of risk, that because the threat level is changing, we don't have all the answers about the safety of every last pipeline. We just don't. It's going to take study, observation, and but that again elevates the understanding of everybody involved. Then that's where we get this adaptive capacity of collective decisions that will help manage that risk. Maybe it's going to be buffer zones. Maybe it's going to be, the community, the benefit planning, that collaborative planning could be seen as adaptive capacity, right? And then again, we see whether Justice 40 is with us or not, or whether it will ever be with us again in exactly the form that it was for the last couple of years. This energy transition is a huge opportunity to improve the lives of Louisiana, especially environmental justice communities. And this participatory planning is an old field in the planning literature, several decades at least. And again, this is a way of building, and managing, building consensus in the community and managing conflict. And again, it's a chance for industries that are coming into Louisiana to lead the way. And you talk about a feather in a company's cap, to be able to gain some traction with some of these wicked problems, complex problems in Louisiana's industrial corridor. This would be huge. These people would be invited to go lecture at Harvard Business School. And so we're trying hard at LSU to find, this rational kind of middle ground. Briefly, we've got something that we're putting together called the LSU's Local Engagement Assessment and Planning Model. And it's basically, it will be a set of resources to help facilitate contact and meaningful, negotiations between the companies coming in and local communities. And it's kind of just setting the table. We're not advocating, we at universities can't, we're by law, barred from lobbying, and it's a good thing. And our research has to stand on its own. It's not up for sale. It's not, we have a pretty, and we feel it at LSU, a sacred responsibility of being the flagship public university in a poor state. For decades, our mandate, that land grant mandate, is to answer real, thorny, real world questions that are being posed by Louisiana residents. It's not to advocate for a company here or there, or try to suppress, economic growth here or there. It's not to have any kind of political agenda or thumb on the scale. So anyway, this is what we've done some focus group work and survey work over the last year with a couple of communities where carbon capture is being rolled out or proposed, and there's a lot of controversy. And we think we would be smart to develop this community well-being scorecard. And again, this would be an assessment tool that would be developed, and we can talk about this later, with representatives of the community working in focus groups to try to come up with, what are the biggest problems in the community. Then we can quantify them, map them. And again, also we figure, this is similar to that EJ screening tool, but it would be more tailor-made to the problems that we're hearing from Louisiana residents. In other words, what's the low-hanging fruit for community development? And also this catalog of industry community plans, we started looking at this and realized, going back to the post-World War II period, there had been good neighbor agreements and really community benefit plans between a variety of petrochemical companies and communities, where they were built. Some things appear to have worked, investments in job training and education, for example. So from that, we hope to develop, we're launching several symposia to derive insights from researchers, practitioners, folks like you, industry leaders, also to develop what are best practices for industry community partnerships. Where is there any kind of sign of life that we can get beyond this and do a little bit better? And then workshops to enhance the capacities of the energy companies, coming in with local stakeholders, as in a dialogue committee, to work together better. And this is ultimately where we're headed in the next couple of years, regardless of who's in the White House, who's in the governor's office, who, what programs are in favor, which ones are not. This is where the rubber meets the road in Louisiana, we believe. We're looking at categories for this scorecard, including hazard exposure, energy needs. Where does the electricity grid need shoring up? Certainly education and job training. Again, the Justice 40 framework had suggested categories of problems that could be addressed, in that host community. And again, the value that we think this would bring to companies is that it helps identify, really needed areas of investment that over time could bring return on the investments that could be tracked. And this would be a longer term proposition, but we could workshop it in Louisiana. It's just a little bit more that, again, user-friendly outputs, interactive maps and dashboards, so that we're seeing times too where members of the community are fractured and polarized. This could help bring everyone on the same page as to what the glaring needs in that host community really are. And again, we think that this kind of scorecard could help be a tool to help guide strategic investments. And then, as I mentioned, we're working on a catalog of prior agreements and between companies and host communities in Louisiana. And we are doing a series of content analyses, and we're hoping to derive performance indicators based on this kind of historic record. And whatever we can find, I think will be useful. And also, we're planning some survey work with participants of these, collaborative planning agreements that were reached in the past to see where things maybe got off track and what could have been improved, what worked and what didn't. Lessons learned is what we're trying to get. And again, just a restatement that these tools could create a strategic approach for companies to align business goals with community development priorities. Heaven knows there's a ton of data out there, a ton of these tools, but we think we could do something a little more targeted. And again, support high impact initiatives, such as the workforce training that could lead to a good return on investment. Also, the process would involve community members and help break down some of those, polarized silos that we're seeing in some communities. And again, the scorecard would promote transparency and accountability. No mystery where this data is coming from. And again, ultimately, the companies, if they wanted to get involved in this more, or they've obviously got community engagement experts and teams of people. This could be another tool and another resource. And again, this could strengthen, as Alan Murray was getting at, corporate reputational capital, and again, sustainable community development in a place and time that is probably about the most challenged anywhere in the world, right? This perfect storm of Louisiana rolling out this new technology for energy transition in this context of the industrial corridor, longstanding problems, and political polarization. If we can do it here, we could do it anywhere. If we could improve it here, it's going to be generalizable and helpful elsewhere. That despite the changes in federal policy, obviously there's still opportunities to build durable relationships that are going to be a little more healthy and lasting among industries, and especially the stakeholder groups in these environmental justice Louisiana communities. And we think that, again, some of the work we've done across the LSU campus, different colleges, engineering and social work. We've had experience in EJ communities, and we think that can help support this collaborative planning. And so the bottom line is, we're in this together. There is an important need for places like LSU to continue the good, objective scientific and technical research, because again, we're, like it or not, universities still occupy a position of relative trust among most members of our community. That may be LSU football, I don't know, we'll take it. But we're seeing, again, a glaring need for the universities to take a deep breath, partner, I think, with groups like yours, and again, try to be a little more innovative so that we can bring some usable tools, to this incredibly important series of challenges that we're facing now. Okay, and I think that is it. Yeah, those are just some references if anybody's interested. Okay, guys, thank you. That's it.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Hi, again, pardon me for coming in late and having technical difficulty. I'm in part of that swamp you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say thank you. Community engagement is something that the company that I work for has been really passionate about. But working with Ellevate, being a Louisiana citizen, I was curious, um, in periods of social and political stress. In
Mhm.
your research, what distinguishes engagement that stabilizes communities from
Mhm.
engagement that unintentionally deepens division?
Yeah. The, that I mean that is the $64 jillion question. I mean, just but and we're I the conventional wisdom has been that been coming from this community resilience literature is that the tools or the building blocks of for a community to weather a big sea change kind of controversy. Where there's polarized views, there's maybe real hazard that could be unleashed into the community. Who gets to decide? And it's just like kind of a hard thing. The conflict is ripening, but it's heating up. And so the resilience literature tells us that the tools, the resources in that community, building blocks to be able to weather that and figure out what is, kind of the smart path forward that is fair to everybody enough, and reduces risk, but at the same time doesn't close the door to maybe some new, development or some new big thing. Is that it's those networks they have to be pre-existing in the community, that you don't go in and try to artificially put together a little committee of clergy members, or pick one from this, here's a minister somebody knows, or here's a retired school teacher, and we're going to call it a day. And there's something very challenging about these networks of communication that exist within, trusted communication within any community. We've all got them. We've got our close circle of friends and colleagues. We've got our family, maybe a faith community, maybe a neighborhood association. And we've got to drop in real factual answers to questions into those networks, because it's too late if we just go in and try to pull together something that looks like a dialogue committee when you've got these pre-existing silos within the community. So it's been tricky, but that's been one lesson, from and even a place like that gets hit with a hurricane. You can think of it and we studied a lot about areas of New Orleans that came back faster. And there was an element of this social capital and this trusting of shared information. And it wasn't just explained by who had the insurance money to rebuild and who didn't. But it was, who was isolated, if pockets of people that don't know their neighbors, that aren't plugged into the community. That needs, we need to address some of that, but use the pre-existing networks of trusted communication. And that really, and we've actually done some research after the wildfires out west, and there was, if you think of it, low social capital and low understanding really about the fire hazard was coming from very wealthy people that were not native, not this last time in Los Angeles, but a little bit before that, up in the mountains. Drew Barrymore and people like that were, wealthy people that, of course, I guess she's from California, but there, rich people living in hazardous areas surrounded by tall trees, not understanding, the fire ecology of the place they had moved into. And the money did not buy what we think of as resilience, because those building blocks of community and communicating the changing science, the hazard being introduced into the community, whether it's a natural hazard or this new technology that is being scaled up. So that would be all that we've really been, and it's easier said than done.
Dr. Reams, I got a question for you. One last question. Sorry, Julie. So if you were advising young lawmakers today, what policy change or what is your greatest opportunity to rewrite policy frameworks today so we can at least eat that elephant one bite at a time?
I think the key, Louisiana is a weird place, because of our history of inefficiency and corruption. But I think the short answer would be more local input into the details of any kind of tax. Well, there's the tax question, but I think to write in something of a community advisory committee, a community advisory group, CAG, a CAG, that has been the model in some of that Superfund legislation that you've got to have if you are taking federal money. Part of the cleanup plan, the community has to have a say-so in it. But I would try hard to build in that little extra thing, because I know the police juries and things, trying to decide what to do with the tax exemption is not a perfect. So, some people argue that the corruption is more intense at the local level than it is. It could be easily worse at the local level, depending on the locality. I don't know, but I think to get a little bit creative and also to look at. I think a shortcut is always to look at what other U.S. states are doing, and inevitably there is going to be some way that is going to be a little more innovative than what we have thought of here, to require some kind of a citizen or a community advisory group to have it, at least to start shining some daylight on and also to sort of slow it down. I think that there would be maybe some time requirements, and a lot of people, even when it comes to public hearings and things, there's not enough time, or they say they don't know about it, or but I think I'll give that a little bit more thought. But I think that is that's a central question right there. Because again, people could, you, Julie, and others. I mean, you're in the political world, and somebody could run again, and but I think also to look at a handful of other U.S. states that and even Texas. I hate to say, but even Texas, because we've looked at some of the permit applications and requirements for the same company in Louisiana doing the same thing in Texas, and inevitably the permit is more stringent in Texas in terms of. So I think.
We're so poor that we're scared not to let the money. We're scared to restrict what they want because we're scared to not have the money.
Yeah.
Dr. Reams, we appreciate you sharing your time with us today, and what you're doing is such important work. And, as I said, at Ellevate, we believe strongly in finding that middle space of reason in data. And so we appreciate what you're doing. And to all of our members that are here still with us after we went a little long, thank you for supporting that vision. Because the vision has nothing if there's nobody listening to it. So we greatly appreciate you. And for everyone out there listening to the podcast, thank you for your engagement. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. If you're interested in these types of policy talks, check us out on Ellevate Louisiana's website, where you can learn more about our events, our policy committees, advocacy efforts, and how to join. That website is ellevatela.org, ELLEVATELA.org. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.